The alien king gave away his infertile daughter. The human treated her like royalty. Inside, the throne room buzzed with tension and whispered speculation. Nobles in flowing robes whispered in low tones, their sharp eyes fixed on the center of the room, where King Varrock of the Viorlians sat. His skin was a deep shade of silver, eyes glinting like polished onyx, and his posture radiated authority. Yet tonight, there was a shadow over him. Before the king, on a raised platform, knelt his daughter, Princess Lyra. She was smaller than most Viorlians, her frame delicate, her pale golden hair cascading around her shoulders. Her violet eyes, wide and curious, scanned the hall nervously. She had always been a quiet child, thoughtful and observant, yet she carried the heavy weight of expectation, the legacy of her royal blood. But there was a cruel label that clung to her name: infertile. In Viorlian culture, lineage was everything. A royal without the ability to continue the family line was considered a failure, a disappointment, and in extreme cases, a burden. That label had haunted Lyra for years. King Varrock cleared his throat. "This situation cannot continue," he said, his voice echoing through the vast room. "I have given my daughter every chance, every hope, yet the prophecy and her failure," he shook his head. "It is time to make a decision for the good of the throne." A hush fell over the room. Nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked surprised, some indifferent, but all were waiting for the king's words to decide the fate of the princess. King Varrock raised his hand. "I have arranged an exchange." From the side of the hall, a human emissary stepped forward. The humans were considered weak and unpredictable by the Viorlians, often mocked in whispered conversations as a fragile species. Yet this particular human, Captain Elias Ward, stood with quiet confidence. His uniform was simple, unlike the elaborate robes of the Viorlians, but there was a calm authority in his posture that drew attention. His eyes, a deep brown, scanned the crowd with mild interest. "I am here," Elias said clearly. "I accept your proposal, King Varrock." A murmur ran through the court. Humans rarely entered the palace, and fewer still would accept such a responsibility. The Viorlians expected weakness, compliance, or even refusal, yet Elias' words carried no hesitation. King Varrock nodded curtly. "Then it is decided. Princess Lyra will leave Viorlia and go with this human." Lyra's heart raced. She had heard rumors of humans, stories told by palace servants and traders. They were said to be fragile, weak, short-lived, and unpredictable. She wondered what life with one would be like. And yet, despite her fear, there was a spark of curiosity in her. Perhaps in a strange way, this was a chance for freedom, freedom from judgment, from expectation, and from the constant reminder of her failure. The ceremony began. Lyra was formally handed over to Elias in front of the gathered court. Silver chains and ceremonial garments were replaced with a simple cloak, and she was led to the human ship that awaited outside the palace. The ship itself was unremarkable by Viorlian standards, its hull modest, its engines quiet, but there was something about it that seemed practical and efficient, unlike the overly decorative vessels of her own species. Elias offered his hand. "Welcome aboard," he said simply. Lyra hesitated, then placed her hand in his. It was warmer than she expected. There was no pomp, no ceremony, only the human's steady presence. As the ship lifted off, the city of Viorlia stretched beneath them, sparkling and alien. Lyra watched her home recede, a mixture of sadness and relief washing over her. She turned to Elias, trying to understand him. "You seem calm," she said, her voice soft. "Do humans not fear the unknown?" Elias smiled faintly. "We do. But we also believe in solving problems as they come, not letting fear rule us. You'll see, it works better than worrying about what might happen." Lyra considered his words. She had spent years worrying about her supposed weakness, her inability to meet her father's expectations. But humans, it seemed, had a different perspective. They valued action, intelligence, and courage over strict tradition. The voyage was long, and the ship's corridors were small compared to the sprawling palace she had left behind. Yet Lyra found herself fascinated by the human technology. Simple panels, glowing buttons, and clean, efficient designs spoke of practicality. There were no unnecessary decorations, no opulent displays meant to impress. Everything had a purpose. During the first meal, Elias explained the basics of human life. "We grow our food, repair our technology, and explore space with what we can carry. We rely on each other, not on grand rituals or prophecies." Lyra listened carefully. It was strange to hear someone speak so openly about life without judgment or expectation. On Violia, every action, every word was measured against centuries of tradition. Here, the rules felt different. They felt freeing. Over the following days, Elias and his crew shared stories of human worlds, of planets where communities worked together to survive harsh climates, where humans had learned to adapt and thrive despite scarcity. Lyra began to notice a pattern. Humans were clever, inventive, and resilient. They faced challenges not by hiding or complaining, but by finding solutions. One evening, Lyra stood on the observation deck, watching a nebula drift past. Elias joined her quietly. "You seem to enjoy the stars," he said. "They are beautiful," Lyra replied, "but they also remind me of what I've left behind and what I don't understand about humans." Elias nodded. "Humans may seem small or weak at first glance, but our strength is in our minds and hearts. We learn, adapt, and care for each other. That's something you may find different from Violia." Lyra looked at him, sensing a sincerity she had rarely experienced in the royal court. Perhaps this human was different from what she had imagined. Perhaps she, too, could learn something new. As the ship continued through space, Lyra's curiosity grew. She explored every corner of the vessel, asking questions about the engines, the navigation systems, and the communication arrays. The crew responded with patience, explaining things in ways she could understand. Each answer, each demonstration reinforced what Elias had said. Humans adapted, they solved problems, and they worked together. One morning, a sudden warning light flashed in the control room. Lyra rushed in to see the crew working quickly to adjust the course. Without hesitation, she offered an idea based on what she had learned about Violian navigation. The suggestion worked. The crew paused, impressed by her insight. Elias looked at her with a proud smile. "You are sharper than you believe," he said. "Perhaps it is not about your past labels, princess, but about what you choose to do now." Lyra felt a warmth she had never known in the palace, a sense of worth beyond the titles, beyond the expectations, beyond the cruel whispers. For the first time, she realized that her life might hold meaning in ways Violia had never allowed her to see. The days passed, each one bringing new lessons and small victories. Lyra began to understand humans not as fragile beings, but as capable and resourceful. Their strength was quiet, subtle, and profound. And in this new world, far from judgment and tradition, she felt something that had always eluded her in Violia: freedom. As the ship sailed toward the human homeworld, Lyra stood at the observation deck once more, watching stars streak past. She turned to Elias and whispered, almost to herself, "Perhaps being given away was not the end. Perhaps it is the beginning." Elias nodded, sensing her resolve. "It is always a beginning, princess, always." And for the first time in her life, Lyra smiled, not for duty, not for appearances, but for herself. The human ship glided silently through the void of space, its engines emitting a low, steady hum. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, twinkling like distant fires against the dark fabric of the universe. Princess Lyra spent most of her time on the observation deck, watching the endless sky, trying to understand this strange new life she had been thrust into. Life aboard a human ship was nothing like the palace of Violia. There were no towering walls of crystal, no servants bowing at every movement, no strict rituals dictating every meal or gesture. Instead, there was a quiet efficiency, a rhythm that seemed to blend work and rest seamlessly. Humans moved with purpose but rarely showed arrogance. Even Captain Elias, the one who had taken her in, carried an air of calm authority rather than dominance. Lyra was beginning to notice small things: the way the crew communicated without unnecessary words, the way each person seemed to understand their role without being ordered constantly. Humans were not ruled by hierarchy or fear. They trusted each other to act. And somehow in this trust, there was strength. One morning, Lyra wandered into the ship's engineering room. Panels of blinking lights and smooth metal surfaces stretched in every direction. Machines hummed and shifted, and crew members moved about, adjusting components and checking readings. "Curious?" a voice asked behind her. Lyra turned to see Elias watching her with a small smile. I just want to understand," she admitted. "Everything here is so different from Violia. Even the ships, they are simple, yet I sense they are capable of much more than they appear." Elias nodded. "Humans like simplicity. We believe efficiency matters more than appearance. The technology may look basic, but it can adapt to nearly any challenge. We rely on brains more than tradition, princess." Lyra's violet eyes widened. Brains more than tradition, she whispered. In her palace, tradition ruled every choice. A single mistake, no matter how small, could bring shame. Here, mistakes seemed like lessons, not punishments. You're learning quickly, Elias said. But theory is one thing, practice is another. Come, I want to show you something. He led her to a small section of the ship, where a simulation deck allowed the crew to train for unexpected challenges. Screens lit up, showing asteroid fields, rogue satellites, and unpredictable space phenomena. Humans never know exactly what we'll face, Elias explained. So we train for adaptability, for thinking on our feet. The galaxy is unpredictable, and so are its dangers. Lyra listened carefully, absorbing every word. She had been taught Viorlian tactics all her life, strategies rigidly defined by centuries of practice and rigid rules. Humans, by contrast, seemed to improvise, to adjust, and to find solutions in real time. It was a revelation. Would you like to try? Elias asked, gesturing to the simulation controls. Lyra hesitated. I do not know if I can. Do not worry about failure, Elias replied. Here, failure is part of learning, that is the difference. With trembling hands, Lyra took control of the simulation. The asteroid field loomed on the screen, and the ship she guided darted between massive rocks. At first, she hesitated, narrowly avoiding collisions. But as she focused, she began to anticipate movements, adjusting the course with intuition she had never realized she possessed. The crew watched quietly, nodding approval. When she finally completed the simulation, Elias clapped lightly. You adapted faster than most of my crew, he said. I believe you may have underestimated yourself all along. Lyra felt a warmth she had never experienced in the palace. For years, she had been told she was weak, incapable, and unworthy. Here she had succeeded by thinking, observing, and reacting, and no one had mocked her. No one had demanded obedience. In the following days, Lyra began to participate in the ship's daily routines. She learned to read star charts, to understand the mechanics of the engines, and even to help navigate minor obstacles. The crew treated her with respect, not as royalty, but as a valuable member. She found herself thriving under the encouragement rather than fear. One afternoon, while working on a communication array, Lyra noticed a faint signal from a nearby planet. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but distinct enough to warrant attention. Captain, she said, there is a signal from that planet. It looks like it's in distress. Perhaps they need help. Elias examined the readings. Good eye. Humans are often rewarded for noticing details others might miss. We act quickly and we act together, prepare to assist. Lyra's heart raced. On Violia, noticing such a signal might have been ignored or deemed irrelevant if it did not serve political purposes. Here, action meant helping, not scheming. It was unfamiliar yet refreshing. When the ship arrived at the planet, the crew discovered a small colony trapped by a severe storm. Humans immediately worked to stabilize structures, provide supplies, and guide the colonists to safety. Lyra watched in awe. Humans were not the fragile species she had been told they were. They were resourceful, cooperative, and brave in the face of danger. During the operation, Lyra's knowledge of Viorlian construction helped. She suggested reinforcing certain buildings in ways humans had not considered, and her advice saved critical structures from collapse. Elias nodded in approval. You see, he said, it is not only about strength or technology. Thinking, learning, and adapting, that is power. Lyra began to understand. Humans were not perfect. They made mistakes, they argued, and they sometimes failed. But their failures were not shameful, they were lessons. And each lesson built resilience, courage, and innovation. That night, as the crew celebrated their successful rescue, Lyra sat quietly with Elias on the observation deck. The colony below was safe, lights twinkling like stars on the planet's surface. I never imagined this, Lyra said softly. I always thought humans were weak, but now I see they are extraordinary in ways my people cannot understand. Elias smiled. We have our flaws, yes, but we survive and we improve, and we value each other for who we are, not just what we can produce. Lyra looked out at the stars, feeling a strange sense of belonging. For the first time, she felt she could be herself without the weight of judgment. Humans had taught her something invaluable. Worth was not measured by tradition or labels, but by actions, thoughts, and heart. The next day, Lyra discovered another surprising fact. She might not be infertile after all. While exploring the ship's medical systems, she came across a diagnostic analysis that indicated her previous tests on Violia had been flawed. The instruments on the human ship were precise, unbiased, and thorough. "Princess," Elias said gently when he saw her surprise, "sometimes the judgments of others are wrong. Tradition can blind even the wisest. It seems your situation was misunderstood." Lyra's mind raced. Could it be true? The entire weight of shame she had carried for years might have been based on flawed assumptions. Yet, even more important than the revelation was the realization she had grown stronger without even knowing it. She had survived, learned, and thrived in a world that valued intelligence and courage over lineage. Over the next weeks, Lyra continued to learn from the humans. She participated in repairs during engine malfunctions, guided navigation through asteroid belts, and even practiced emergency drills. Each success, each challenge, reinforced what she had begun to understand. Humans were extraordinary not because they were perfect, but because they adapted, cooperated, and never gave up. Lyra began to reflect on her life on Violia. The palace, the traditions, the constant judgment, they had all been barriers limiting her growth. Here, she was free to think, to act, and to grow. And with every lesson, she began to see a new version of herself emerging, confident, capable, and alive. One evening, as the ship sailed past a colorful nebula, Lyra stood beside Elias once again. "I think I am beginning to understand," she said. "The strength humans have is not what my people would call strength. It is patience, intelligence, and courage. And it is something that cannot be measured by tradition or prophecy." Elias nodded, his eyes reflecting the glowing nebula. "Exactly, Princess. Humans are not perfect, but we endure, and endurance, that is a kind of power all its own." Lyra smiled, feeling a warmth she had never known. She was beginning to see herself not as a failed princess, but as someone capable of making a difference. And she realized, for the first time, that perhaps her journey with humans was not exile, but opportunity. The stars stretched endlessly before them, and Lyra knew that the galaxy held countless lessons, challenges, and mysteries. And for the first time, she was eager to face them. The human ship sailed on, steady and confident. And aboard it, a princess who had once been dismissed as weak began to discover the power of courage, intelligence, and heart. The human ship had been traveling through a remote sector of space for several weeks. Princess Lyra had grown more confident in her new life, learning from the crew and participating in missions that tested her skills. She had learned to navigate, repair systems, and even anticipate challenges based on her observations. Each day, she felt herself growing stronger, not just in skill, but in spirit. But space was unpredictable, and the galaxy held dangers that even humans could not always foresee. It began with a sudden alert. Red lights flashed across the control room, accompanied by a loud alarm. Crew members rushed to their stations, faces tense but focused. "What is happening?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but tinged with concern. Elias studied the readouts. "We've been detected. Sensors show a Violian fleet approaching. They've tracked us from the edge of the system. It seems they want to retrieve you, Princess." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The Violians were powerful, their fleets technologically advanced and highly disciplined. Humans, on the other hand, were considered weak by the galaxy's standard. Yet she had seen their ingenuity, their clever problem-solving. Still, facing an entire fleet was an entirely new challenge. Elias turned to her. "Stay calm. We've faced dangers before and we'll face this together. Humans may not have the strongest ships, but we can outthink almost any opponent." Lyra nodded, gripping the railing. Fear fluttered in her chest, but it was accompanied by determination. She had learned from humans that fear could be a tool if channeled wisely. The fleet appeared on the view screen, sleek and imposing. Hundreds of ships formed an aggressive formation, closing in with terrifying speed. Most would expect a human vessel to surrender immediately. But the crew did not flinch. They began maneuvers that would confuse and mislead their pursuers, weaving through asteroid fields and using gravity wells to their advantage. Lyra watched, fascinated. How can you possibly outmaneuver them? They have so many ships. Elias smiled faintly. "Numbers are not everything. Predictability is a weakness. Humans improvise, humans adapt. Watch closely." As the Violian ships fired, the human crew responded with precision. Shields were adjusted, engines rerouted, and small decoy drones were deployed. Lyra's eyes widened as she saw humans working in perfect coordination, anticipating the enemy's moves before they happened. "Princess," Elias said, "I need your help. You understand Violian tactics. Can you tell me what they will do next?" Lyra took a deep breath. She studied the formation, remembering her lessons on Viorlian hierarchy and strategy. Slowly, she began to predict the enemy's movements. "They will try to split their fleet," she said, pointing at the view screen. "Half will attempt to flank us from the left. They expect a straight path, but if we take the asteroid field on the right, we can confuse them and create openings." Elias nodded. "Good thinking. Crew, execute her plan." The ship veered sharply, diving into the asteroid field. The Viorlian ships pursued, but their formation faltered. The smaller human ship darted between rocks, using agility and clever maneuvers to avoid heavy fire. Lyra's heart pounded with excitement and fear. She was helping to guide the course, using her knowledge of Viorlian strategy to outsmart them. "Princess, the right flank," Elias called. "Adjust shields to redirect energy bursts." Lyra focused, remembering the lessons she had learned in engineering. With careful adjustments, the ship's shields absorbed and redirected the enemy's energy, sending it harmlessly into the void. The crew moved as one, executing maneuvers that seemed impossible to the Viorlians. Hours passed, and the battle continued. Lyra realized something incredible. Humans did not rely on brute strength or superior numbers. They relied on creativity, quick thinking, and cooperation. Each member of the crew had a role, but each could also adapt if the situation changed. It was a dance of strategy and intelligence, and Lyra was now part of it. At one point, a Viorlian ship broke through the asteroid field and targeted the human vessel directly. Alarms blared as the weapon systems locked on. Lyra's mind raced. She remembered a suggestion Elias had made about using the ship's cargo bays as temporary energy deflectors. Acting quickly, she directed the crew to reroute power and deploy barriers. The beam fired, and to everyone's amazement, it was deflected harmlessly into space. "Excellent work, Princess," Elias said, clapping her shoulder. "You just saved us all." Lyra's chest swelled with pride. She had once been dismissed as weak, incapable, and unworthy. Now she was proving herself not just to humans, but to herself. The lesson was clear. Intelligence, courage, and quick thinking could triumph over raw power. The battle raged on, and the humans continued to use unconventional tactics. They deployed small, unmanned ships to lure enemies into traps, created temporary cloaking fields to escape detection, and even used the Viorlians' own formations against them. Lyra watched in awe as human ingenuity turned the tide of a battle that should have been hopeless. During a brief pause in the fight, Elias turned to Lyra. "See, Princess, humans may not be physically strong, but we survive because we think differently. We turn obstacles into opportunities." Lyra nodded, realizing the truth of his words. The Viorlians valued strength and tradition, relying on predictable tactics and rigid plans. Humans, by contrast, thrived on flexibility, creativity, and collaboration, and it was precisely these qualities that allowed them to challenge an entire fleet. The final phase of the encounter approached. The Viorlian fleet, frustrated and disorganized, attempted a concentrated assault. The human crew anticipated it, using a combination of decoys, precise maneuvers, and environmental hazards to scatter the enemy ships. Lyra suggested a bold move, using the gravitational pull of a nearby gas giant to slingshot their ship around, gaining speed and creating confusion. Elias considered it for a moment. "It's risky, but it could work." Lyra's eyes were determined. "We can do it, trust the crew." The maneuver was executed flawlessly. The human ship shot around the gas giant, weaving through its powerful gravity fields. The Viorlian ship struggled to adjust, many colliding with debris or being thrown off course. By the time they regrouped, the humans were long gone, disappearing into a safe corridor of space. The crew erupted in cheers. Lyra felt exhilaration she had never known. Not only had they survived, but they had done so through intelligence, courage, and teamwork. She realized that humans had qualities her own people often overlooked: adaptability, creativity, and resilience. As the ship sailed into calmer space, Lyra stood beside Elias, her violet eyes shining. I never imagined humans could do this. I thought they were weak." "I was wrong," Elias smiled. "Humans are not perfect, Princess, but we endure, and sometimes that is stronger than any fleet, any weapon, or any tradition." Lyra looked out at the stars, reflecting on what had just happened. The battle had tested her, forced her to act, and challenged every assumption she had about strength and power. She had learned that being underestimated could be an advantage, and that clever thinking could overcome even the greatest obstacles. In the following days, Lyra continued to study the human crew's methods. She learned how they prepared for emergencies, how they communicated under pressure, and how they valued each member's unique skills. She even began to train alongside them, practicing emergency drills, learning repair techniques, and helping with navigation simulations. One evening, she found herself alone with Elias on the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly, their light reflecting in the calm surface of the ship's windows. "Captain," Lyra said softly, "I think I understand something important now. Strength is not only about power or weapons, it is about intelligence, courage, and working together. Humans have all of these in ways Virelians do not appreciate." Elias nodded. "Exactly, Princess, and you have begun to embody these qualities yourself. You are learning to think, to act, and to lead in ways your people may never have allowed." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest. For years, she had carried shame and doubt, but now she felt pride and determination. She realized that her life was no longer defined by labels or prophecy, but by what she could do, what she could learn, and how she could contribute. The stars outside the ship seemed brighter that night, as if reflecting her newfound confidence. She knew that challenges would continue, that dangers awaited, but she was ready. The lessons she had learned from humans were invaluable, and she would carry them with her in every decision, every action, and every choice. As she gazed at the infinite expanse of space, Lyra whispered to herself, "I am not weak, I am capable, and I will prove it." The human ship sailed on, leaving the defeated Virelian fleet behind. And aboard it, a princess who had once been dismissed as powerless was beginning to discover the full measure of her own strength. After the intense encounter with the Virelian fleet, the human ship sailed through quiet sectors of space. The crew had regained their calm, and Princess Lyra had grown more confident in her abilities. Each day, she discovered more about humans, their methods, and their extraordinary capacity for problem-solving. It was becoming clear to her that human ingenuity was not just clever, it was revolutionary. The long hours aboard the ship allowed Lyra to spend more time learning from the crew. They taught her navigation techniques, engineering fixes, and even leadership strategies. Humans valued cooperation and communication, unlike Virelians, who often relied on hierarchy and intimidation. In this environment, Lyra found herself growing stronger, not through brute force, but through thought, observation, and action. One day, as the ship approached a small but habitable planet, Elias gathered the crew in the command room. "We are entering the planet's orbit for reconnaissance," he announced. "There may be resources we can use to resupply and repair the ship." Lyra studied the planet's surface through the viewport. Vast forests, rivers, and mountains stretched across the landscape. She noticed small settlements scattered near rivers and clearings, evidence of intelligent life, though primitive by human standards. "This planet could be valuable for trade or diplomacy," Elias said. "It is important we approach carefully and respectfully." Lyra nodded. In Virelia, power often came from conquest or domination. Here, humans emphasized respect, communication, and fairness. She was beginning to understand that leadership was not about ruling through fear. It was about inspiring trust and collaboration. When the ship landed, humans moved quickly to assess the terrain and resources. Lyra followed closely, eager to contribute. She examined local structures and offered suggestions on improving temporary shelters for the crew. Her knowledge of Virelian architecture gave her ideas humans hadn't considered, and Elias smiled in approval. "You're learning to bridge two worlds," he said quietly. "That skill may prove more valuable than you realize." Lyra felt a sense of pride. For years, she had been dismissed as powerless because of her supposed infertility. Now, she was contributing in meaningful ways, respected by humans for her intelligence and insight rather than her royal title. Over the following weeks, the ship continued its journey, and Lyra's growth became evident. She led small teams on exploration missions, helped solve technical problems, and began to participate in strategic planning. Each success reinforced her confidence. She realized that strength was not measured by birthright, appearance, or prophecy. It was measured by action, thought, and courage. One evening, while monitoring the ship's sensors, Lyra noticed unusual activity on a nearby planet. Strange energy readings indicated a natural phenomenon that could be dangerous if not understood. "Captain," she said, pointing at the display, "there's an anomaly. It could be harmful to anyone living nearby. We should investigate before it escalates." Elia studied the readings. Good catch, Princess. We'll send a team to analyze it. Your observation skills are proving invaluable. The team landed on the planet and discovered a series of unstable energy fields caused by natural magnetic disturbances. Humans worked carefully to map and contain the phenomenon, using clever techniques that minimized risk while collecting valuable data. Lyra assisted by analyzing patterns and suggesting adjustments based on her knowledge of Virelian physics. The mission was a success. The humans celebrated, and Lyra felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She realized that she had become more than a passenger on this journey. She was an active contributor, a problem solver, and a valued member of the team. As the days passed, news of their achievements spread through communications channels. Some Virelian officials intercepted messages and were intrigued. They had always considered humans inferior, but reports of a single human ship outmaneuvering fleets and solving complex problems challenged their assumptions. The notion that humans were capable of ingenuity, creativity, and strategy began to circulate quietly among the Virelian population. Meanwhile, Lyra's own perspective continued to evolve. She reflected on her time in the palace and realized how rigid traditions had limited her growth. On Virelia, her supposed weakness had defined her entire life, but with humans, she was free to learn, adapt, and excel. The lessons she had learned were not just about survival. They were about leadership, courage, and understanding the value of every individual. One morning, while preparing for a routine course adjustment, Lyra approached Elias. "Captain, I have been thinking my father and my people do not see the strengths humans have. They only see differences, but I have seen it firsthand. Humans are clever, brave, and cooperative. I believe these qualities could benefit both our species if shared wisely." Elias nodded. "You're beginning to see the bigger picture, Princess. Strength is not only about military power or lineage. It is about intelligence, adaptability, and working together. Perhaps your role will be to connect these two worlds." Lyra considered his words carefully. The thought was both exciting and daunting. Could she truly serve as a bridge between humans and Virelians? Could she help change perceptions and foster cooperation where prejudice had long ruled? She did not know the full answer yet, but the possibility filled her with determination. Weeks later, the ship encountered another human vessel. The two crews exchanged information, sharing maps, technology, and insights about nearby systems. Lyra observed how humans learned from each other, freely exchanging ideas without fear of judgment. The Virelian way of rigid hierarchy and secrecy seemed restrictive by comparison. During the exchange, Lyra demonstrated her understanding of both human and Virelian strategies. She suggested ways to improve navigation systems, anticipate enemy tactics, and enhance ship efficiency. The human crew listened intently, impressed by her insight. For the first time, Lyra felt her dual identity, both Virelian and human ally, was an asset rather than a burden. The human ship continued its journey, exploring new systems and discovering planets suitable for future collaboration. Lyra took every opportunity to practice her leadership skills. She led training exercises, oversaw minor missions, and offered guidance to the crew. Her confidence grew steadily, and she began to see herself not as a princess defined by a label, but as a capable individual capable of influencing events. One day, the ship received an urgent message from a nearby colony. A natural disaster threatened the inhabitants, and they required immediate assistance. Lyra suggested a strategy that combined human ingenuity with her knowledge of Virelian engineering. The crew followed her plan, stabilizing structures, guiding citizens to safety, and distributing supplies efficiently. The mission was a resounding success. Elias looked at her proudly. "You handled that perfectly, Princess. You are becoming a leader in every sense of the word." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of purpose that had been absent in her life on Virelia. She had discovered that her strength lay not in her lineage, her appearance, or her birthright, but in her intelligence, courage, and ability to act when needed. Humans had taught her that leadership came from respect, collaboration, and creative problem-solving, not fear or expectation. As the ship sailed onward, Lyra reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the day she had left Virelia, feeling like a burden, dismissed, and weak. Now, she felt empowered, capable, and ready to face the future. She realized that being given away by her father had not been an end. It had been the beginning of her transformation. One evening, as the ship passed a nebula that glowed in shades of purple and gold, Lyra stood on the observation deck with Elias. "Captain," she said softly, "I have learned something important. Strength is not just about power or skill. It is about courage, intelligence, and the willingness to act. Humans have shown me this, and I want to use what I've learned to help both our peoples understand each other." Elias smiled. "That is a wise goal, Princess. And with your experience, your insight, and your courage, you may succeed where others have failed." Lyra felt a surge of determination. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. Violians might resist change, humans might face challenges, and the galaxy would always hold dangers. But she was ready. She had seen what humans could do, and she had learned from them. She had seen her own potential, and she would not ignore it. The stars stretched endlessly outside, a reminder of the vast possibilities that awaited them. Lyra realized that her journey was not only about survival, it was about growth, understanding, and the courage to challenge old prejudices. She had become more than a princess. She had become a bridge between worlds, a symbol of cooperation, and a testament to the power of intelligence and courage. As the human ship continued its journey, Lyra stood at the observation deck, watching distant planets and stars drift by. She whispered to herself, "I will not be defined by labels. I will use what I've learned to bring our worlds together. I will be a leader, not just for myself, but for all who believe in courage and wisdom." And with that, the princess who had once been dismissed as powerless embraced her transformation. She had discovered her true strength, and she was ready to face the challenges and opportunities that awaited in the galaxy. The calm of deep space was deceptive. Even as Princess Lyra had grown confident in her abilities and understanding of humans, the galaxy remained vast and unpredictable. Reports had begun to reach Captain Elias and his crew about a new threat, a rogue alien force from the outer systems, aggressive and expanding rapidly. Entire colonies had been disrupted, and communication channels warned of devastating raids. "This is serious," Elias said, reviewing sensor reports in the command room. "If this force continues unchecked, it will threaten both human and Violian territories. We need to act fast." Lyra stood beside him, her violet eyes sharp and focused. "We can't face them alone," she said. "But humans and Violians working together, we might have a chance. We just need the right strategy." Elias nodded. "You're right, but convincing the Violians to cooperate will not be easy. They see humans as inferior, remember." Lyra took a deep breath. "Then I will speak to them. I know their ways, I know their pride. If anyone can persuade them, it's someone they once dismissed, the princess they thought was powerless." With a plan in mind, the human ship set course for Violia. As they approached the capital, Lyra felt a mix of nerves and determination. The palace she had left months ago now felt like a distant memory, a place where she had once been defined by labels and expectation. This time she returned not as a burden, but as a force of change, armed with experience, knowledge, and courage. Upon arrival, the human ship was met with suspicion. Violian defense forces surrounded them, weapons trained and ready. From the palace balcony, King Varrock watched, his eyes narrowing. He had heard rumors of the human ship's exploits, the daring escape, the rescue missions, the clever strategies that had allowed them to survive against impossible odds. And now, the princess he had once considered a disappointment had returned alongside these humans. Lyra disembarked, walking calmly through the grand halls. She met the king's gaze with steady confidence. "Father," she began, her voice firm but respectful, "I have seen the strengths humans possess. They are clever, courageous, and resourceful. Alone, they are underestimated. Together, humans and Violians could face any threat. But if we remain divided, both our peoples may suffer." King Varrock's eyes flickered with surprise and uncertainty. No one had spoken to him this way in the palace before. Lyra continued, recounting the experiences she had shared with humans, the rescue missions, the clever strategies, and the human crew's ability to adapt and survive in situations that seemed hopeless. "Humans are not weak," she said. "They are strong in ways our traditions do not recognize, and I have learned from them. I have grown, Father. I am no longer the powerless daughter you thought I was. I can help lead us, but only if we work together." The room was silent. Nobles whispered among themselves, some skeptical, some intrigued. Finally, King Varrock nodded slowly. "You have changed," he said, And perhaps I have underestimated not only humans, but you as well. Very well, we will consider your counsel. Lyra smiled, knowing that words alone would not be enough. Strategy and action would prove her point. Elias and the human crew worked quickly alongside Virelian officers, sharing maps, analyzing intelligence, and planning tactics to counter the rogue alien force. Lyra's knowledge of Virelian culture allowed her to mediate between the two sides, translating strategies and ensuring that human ideas were respected and understood. For the first time, humans and Virelians trained together. They ran simulations, coordinated maneuvers, and shared technology. Humans demonstrated their adaptive tactics, Virelians contributed their technological firepower, and Lyra oversaw the integration of the two approaches. As the day of battle approached, tension was high. Both humans and Virelians knew that failure could mean devastation. But thanks to Lyra's leadership, mutual respect was growing. Even the most skeptical Virelian officers began to see the value of human ingenuity. The enemy appeared suddenly, a massive fleet emerging from a nearby nebula, sleek and hostile. Their ships moved with coordinated precision, intent on overwhelming the combined forces. Lyra stood on the command deck of the human flagship, observing the battlefield. Her heart raced, but she remained calm. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the chance to prove that intelligence, courage, and cooperation could overcome even the most formidable opponent. "Focus on the flanks," she instructed, pointing at the screens. "Humans and Virelians will work together. We'll use their numbers against them, draw them in, then strike with coordinated maneuvers. Timing is everything." Elias nodded. "Understood, Princess. Let's put your plan into action." The battle began. Virelian ships fired powerful energy beams, while humans employed agile maneuvers, deploying decoys and creating unpredictable patterns. Lyra directed operations, analyzing enemy behavior and suggesting adjustments in real time. Her insight, combined with human adaptability and Virelian strength, created a synergy that neither side had thought possible. Hours passed in a tense blur. The enemy fleet was strong, but they were unprepared for the cooperation they faced. Humans and Virelians anticipated each other's moves, covering weaknesses and exploiting opportunities. Lyra's commands were precise, her observations sharp, and her courage unwavering. At a critical moment, the enemy attempted to concentrate their forces on the human flagship. Lyra quickly devised a diversion. Small, unmanned ships darted in and out of enemy lines, drawing fire and creating confusion. Simultaneously, Virelian energy beams struck from unexpected angles, forcing the enemy to split their attention. Elias glanced at Lyra, admiration in his eyes. "That was brilliant," he said. Lyra's mind raced. "Keep pressure on the center, but maintain flexibility. If they adjust, we adjust. The key is adaptability." The plan worked flawlessly. The enemy fleet became disoriented, their formations breaking apart. Human agility and Virelian firepower combined with Lyra's strategic insight to create an unstoppable force. Slowly, systematically, the rogue ships were disabled or forced to retreat. Finally, the enemy commander, realizing defeat, ordered a full retreat. The combined forces of humans and Virelians had won. Cheers erupted across the fleet, and even the Virelian nobility, observing from orbit, could not deny the victory. Back on the flagship, Lyra stood beside Elias as the crew celebrated. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not for herself alone, but for what had been achieved through cooperation and mutual respect. King Varrock appeared on the communication feed, his expression a mix of pride and humility. "Princess Lyra," he said, "you have proven not only your own strength, but the value of humans. I see now that my assumptions were wrong. Together, we are stronger than we imagined." Lyra bowed slightly. "Thank you, Father, but this victory belongs to everyone who fought together, humans and Virelians alike. We have learned that strength is not just in power, but in intelligence, courage, and cooperation." The galaxy had witnessed something remarkable. Where once humans had been dismissed as weak, they were now respected for their ingenuity, adaptability, and bravery. Virelians had begun to reconsider old prejudices, and Lyra had emerged as a symbol of unity and wisdom. In the days following the battle, humans and Virelians began formal cooperation efforts. They exchanged technology, shared strategies, and coordinated exploration missions. Lyra continued to play a central role, guiding communication between the two species, and demonstrating the value of collaboration. As the combined fleets patrolled newly secured sectors, Lyra reflected on her journey. She remembered the day she had been given away by her father, dismissed as powerless and unworthy. She remembered the long voyage with humans, the lessons in courage, strategy, and ingenuity. And now she had seen the culmination of those lessons, a victory not just of ships and weapons, but of understanding, cooperation, and human ingenuity. One evening, she stood on the observation deck of the flagship, watching the stars drift past. Elias joined her silently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've grown so much, Princess," he said. "You've shown leadership, courage, and insight beyond what anyone could have expected." Lyra smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. "It was not just me. Humans taught me to think, to adapt, and to act. And together, humans and Virelians proved that we can overcome anything." Elias nodded. "The galaxy will remember this day, and so will your people. You have changed the course of history, Princess." Lyra gazed at the stars, feeling a deep connection to the universe around her. She had discovered her true strength, not in labels or tradition, but in action, intelligence, and courage. She had embraced her potential and used it to unite two worlds. And in that moment, she realized that the journey was only beginning. There would be more challenges, more threats, and more opportunities to grow, but she was ready. She was no longer the powerless princess her father had given away. She was a leader, a bridge between worlds, and a testament to the power of courage, intelligence, and heart. The human flagship sailed onward, carrying its crew and its princess into a galaxy full of possibilities. And as stars shimmered around them, Lyra whispered quietly to herself, "We can achieve anything together." The galaxy had learned a lesson: underestimate humans at your own peril. And Princess Lyra, once dismissed as weak, had become proof that courage, intelligence, and cooperation could change the course of history.